Hello students, welcome back to FA 218, Painting 2. We're going to take a look at my start for the transformation painting. So you were supposed to take an object and transform it somehow. Here is the final for stage 1, and we'll walk your way through the different parts to get here. So first things first, just a real quick mixing of some darks together. What I decided to do for this has got some brown, some transparent blue, or actually that's Payne's gray, and some ultramarine blue to make a dark ground imprimatura. So we've got the paint. It took me a while to kind of mix it all up, and once I was ready, then we went through and started painting all this paint down onto the canvas. So this is snapping around kind of quickly here, but once we get a better view, this will speed up a little bit. I would normally probably apply this with a larger brush if I had one around. The trick about having a large brush and using that to tone a canvas is then you have to clean a large brush. So a smaller brush sometimes does make things a little bit easier for cleanup and trying to get everything put together. So kind of slowly adding the paint, working my way down the canvas so that when I get to the bottom of the canvas, I have a dark. And my plan for this is from last semester we did a wet blending painting, so that was our third painting. My plan is to do that, and instead of having a light ground to start on, I'm going to start with a dark ground. So this is kind of painting wet into wet, but with a dark base instead of a light base. So here I am doing my sgraffito drawing with the back edge of my brush, scratching the drawing in from the still life that you can see on the left. I have my iPad set up, so I'm using that to show myself the image. I'm not using a printout or a actual still life. I'm trying to make it so to be something like what you could do. And then here, after I have my scratch drawing in, now I am going to start going through and bringing out the lights. So with what we did in the wet blending painting last semester, you would paint your darks into that wet ground. Well, now I'm doing the opposite of that in this painting. I'm going through and trying to bring all the highlights, the brighter parts of the hand cast, the skull, and the orange out by bringing light values onto it, and that will allow me to kind of leave that dark brown underneath to show darker areas. I'm sitting here and narrating this, looking at the painting. There's definitely some areas where I probably could have painted another color in, but I didn't, and I did leave the brown, but eventually I do kind of try to cover most of this painting up. So I'm kind of slowly building these lights and whites. They seem very bright right now, but as I start to block everything else in, they're going to kind of disappear. One thing you can do with this, and you can see me doing it right now, is I'm kind of redrawing and refining that edge with this lighter paint. I would do the same thing probably with a dark. We're at the opposite that we had done before. I'm going to find some highlights in there. I'm trying not to put too much information. I'm mostly trying to squint when I look at the still life and use that to kind of inform where things are going to go and where I'm going to put some of those lighter highlight areas. I'm not worried about all the little tiny fine details in the tinfoil. I think I can kind of try to average some of that out because it is so complicated. So now that I've kind of drawn the fist in, now I'm moving over to the skull. This skull was in my first painting, so that'll kind of keep these two related to each other, which is usually one of the things that we try to focus on in this first painting of painting two is having a series or a bunch of paintings that kind of somehow connect to each other. So I'm trying to build up the lights. Sometimes I'm holding the brush sideways so I can draw and get a thin line. Other times I want to fill in or have a thicker line, block it in, so I'll use the side of the brush. And so just kind of trying to go through and build this out. Most of it here is kind of plugged in, and I'm starting to find the shapes of the eye socket, find the shape of different areas. This is all going to get a second coat of paint and get some color as I kind of move forward. But this first stage is really just kind of trying to draw and block in, where are things, how big are they, what is the size of the orange compared to the size of the skull. How do those both compare to the fist? Where do I want to place them? How big do I want to have them on my canvas? Am I going to crop parts of this off? Am I going to try to get most of it on the actual canvas, or am I going to, pick and choose? For this, I felt like keeping everything on there was the right choice. I probably could have slid this slightly to the left or the right and cropped some of it off, but overall, I think I was pretty happy with the drawing. And that's good because that saves me some time, not having to redo a bunch of things. So now that I have that light kind of white drawing, now I am using, this is a pale yellow, and I'm going to use that to start to paint that yellow wall in on the left. I do think I'm going to want to maybe use something a little bit stronger. Some of the colors I'll try to mention as I go through and use this, but this is a pale extra, or light yellow extra pale. So it's mostly white with a little bit of yellow mixed in. It's a very bright color. It doesn't look super yellow right now, but I think as I plug in some of the reds and the oranges, it will look a little bit better. My red is principally a red ochre, and then here I am using an old tube of Vasari color. This is a Capuchin Red Deep, and I'm using this to kind of make the shadow from the fist onto the wall. And it's going to take me a little bit of time. I think it took me about 4 or 5 passes, and each time I kept making the wall on the right side that is red lighter and lighter and lighter. So it takes me a while to get there, but I know that blending this red in with the brown or dark mixture that's underneath, I'm not going to get a full brightness on the first day. And that's okay. This is where I start to add in some of those reflected lights, some brighter areas that maybe are starting to pick up the red. Here I'm bringing that highlight next to the thumb out and making it a little bit brighter again. There's going to be some highlights down on the skull as well. And so I'm just kind of moving around. And just like with our other color boxes, it's always smart to maybe try to block in those big areas. So get the yellow wall painted in, get the red wall painted in, get the blue floor painted in. Your still life may have different things in it and definitely different textures, different walls, and different areas that you are going to paint. And yes, I would still recommend, simplifying. You can kind of change the background to suit your objects and make it work. But for me, this worked pretty well, so I didn't want to change it too much. Here's a little bit of reflected yellow once I had gotten quite a bit of kind of orange on there. I could kind of bring that in and kind of make some of those highlights a little more yellowy and a little bit brighter, which I will probably go and do again in the next session. My plan is to hopefully only have to do this first session and one more before this is finished. Kind of maybe redrawing, a little glazing, a little velatura, and hopefully the painting's done. Bringing out some of those reflections again. Here I am pulling out some light into the wall again. I do think that it's probably time to start putting in some of the blue paint, so it's going to take me a second. I'm probably trying to switch brushes and mix that up. Took me a second to get there, and sure enough, there's the blue paint. So I'm just kind of starting off by just coating the whole ground floor with the blue paint, avoiding painting in the shadows. I'm leaving the brown or the dark that's already there to kind of define the shadows. And then I can kind of build up this pale blue down below to kind of show where the light is hitting the floor. And once I kind of get a little paint everywhere, then I can go back and find certain places where I can put more paint and thicker paint and make it more blue and a little bit brighter. That's what I'm doing here. I don't think that any of this really matches exactly what's in the photo, but that's the whole point, is I have a dark ground, so things are not going to match that. They are going to be different. Try to put in some reflected blues in a few areas, up into the tinfoil in the hand, maybe a little bit on the skull. Find a few of those spots. Then I think I'm going to switch and I start using some of the Payne's Gray because it's so dark, to come in and maybe find a couple of the really dark notes in the tinfoil around the knuckles and behind the thumb to really make those areas kind of pop. I'm not sure if I do that now or if I go back to that in a minute after I start to. No, I'm doing some grays first. And that's a good idea also, to get some middle values, some kind of non-committing colors that kind of fill in some of the gaps. So these are kind of the shadows and some of those other areas, which I can kind of put down, and then I can go back into it and start to change them later. So here's some of those Payne's Gray dark accent notes. Not many of them, putting them just a little bit here and a little bit there in the shadowy areas. And then I think here at the end, I'm going to finish by going through and starting to build up some of the light again. Now that there is paint nearly everywhere, I can start to make those judgments and kind of decide, okay, well, where does the hand get darker? Where does it get lighter? Do I need to bring out a highlight? Some of that I think definitely came about because I start to add some brighter highlights to the skull here. And this is more almost pure white paint. But as I did that, I could see how dark all the other paint that before looked so bright to me, and now it doesn't. So Sometimes one little note in one little area where you start to paint something in totally changes your perspective on how things look. And so that's what happened here, and I started going back through and bringing up some brighter highlights in certain areas on the orange, on the peel, on the skull, and then eventually up onto the fist and the tinfoil, just because it needs a little more contrast, as I felt like I was going through and kind of taking a look at it. So, not too much, but in a few areas, I think it just really kind of helps and it makes it feel a little bit brighter. So, this again is not my final stage. This is probably stage one of two. I'm hoping I don't have to do a third, but who knows? You never know. As you kind of get going, I'll let the painting tell me more than anything. But I will take another session on this once everything dries so I can kind of finish it up, make some more details, and kind of maybe punch a little more color into this. What I'll do in between is I am going to start on the portraits and maybe do a little bit more with drawing those out and starting to build those up. So that's my next plan as this one sits to dry because it's going to take a while. There's a couple spots here that are pretty heavy or thick paint. It's probably going to take until maybe Thursday or so before it's really kind of dry and ready to paint on top of. You never know, but we'll see. So thanks for stopping in. Here's a final shot of my palette and those mixes, and there is the final painting.